Today on Leaders, Christina Cacioppo. Her story is one straight out of a Silicon Valley textbook. After graduating Stanford, Christina began as a venture capitalist funding Jack Dorsey's early Twitter alongside Tumblr, Etsy, and Kickstarter. Then, after her time at the glory days of Dropbox, she set out to build something of her own. She taught herself how to code and turned an Excel spreadsheet into Vanta, a $2.5 billion business. Christina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so you once said that you never thought you were going to be the type of person that would be a founder, right? So what's your view? Can anyone be a founder if you can have that view and then become a unicorn founder?
Yeah, I do actually believe that. I think it may or may not, or parts, I think the job is so multifaceted that no part comes easy to everyone or really anyone. I think some people are better at making it seem that way. Like some founders are good at that and want to be good at that. But I think the job is so multifaceted that there's a lot of different types of people who can be great at it.
So the way that you're describing it makes me feel like it's like, if it's a pie with different slices, you're going to be strong at some of those slices, and then all the other ones are going to be the gaps. And so the way to become a good founder would be to identify the gaps and fill them in.
That is how I approached it. There is like another strain of maybe even more conventional wisdom, which is like kind of screw the gaps and just do what you're great at. And I think, again, empirically, that works for people too. I think for me, doing what I did worked better for me.
Okay, so also part of this would then be know thyself.
Yes, I think that is deeply true. Yes, there's a lot of ways to make it work, but you got to make it work for you.
When I started off in entrepreneurship, I just remember being terrified of leaving my job because it feels like a lot of stress, and I still always reflect on that as maybe the biggest decision I ever made. How do you reflect on that? Was it easy for you?
I think the first time I didn't know, and the second time, yes. And I think some of it's like everything's harder the first time, no matter what it is in life. I think some of it's the California ethos where you're like, you left your job, but like, you know what, the worst thing that happens is you're interviewing back at the same place in 2 weeks and you don't want that outcome, but like, aren't you so lucky that that is the worst case? I think the first time I was, probably 25, 26, I had this job that was, quote unquote, very good. I mean, I liked it. Everyone liked it. People told me, why would you ever leave this job? And I think what was really hard was, people around me with good intention kind of being like, why would you leave this job? What's wrong with you? And I think that caused me to be like, I don't know, is something wrong with me? Which some of that self-reflection was probably good. I definitely took it too far in retrospect.
Quite interesting, like hearing that, because these are pivotal moments in someone's life where you're not sure of yourself.
Right.
And you're not sure of the path. And you have different voices around you basically trying to sometimes do the best for you and sometimes coming from a place of their own regret and their own worldview.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that at 25, 26, you still knew what was the right thing for you. What do you think was the insight from that?
I think there was like nothing, no claim to like brilliance or even really self-insight. I think it was just, I was in that job that everyone liked. And I mean, I kind of liked, but I didn't want to be in it.
Yeah.
And I felt that friction. And again, I kind of had somewhat grappled with the like, I don't know what is quote unquote wrong with me that I don't want this thing everybody else wants, but I know that is true and I feel that. And so I think there's something to like that tension. Okay.
So you obviously going back to, I guess, just before this, you're at Stanford. Classic.
Right, yes. That was just yesterday.
Of course,
yeah.
So you've just freshly graduated from Stanford. What was that like? You hear so many stories about this. Was it pivotal to your entrepreneurial success or just like a stepping stone?
What do I think? So I did 4 years at Stanford and got a microeconomics degree and very much thought I was going to be a microeconomics professor until the very
everyone
end.
On Twitter this week.
Yes, exactly.
Excellent.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's just
pivot. Dusting that off.
Let's just pivot to a tariff lesson then.
Love macro. All witchcraft, as far as I'm concerned. But until the very, very end. And the reason I wanted to be a professor was, I both really liked and like economics. And my parents were professors. And so actually it was like a very comfortable job description and I like understood it. I think in contrast to many people who think it sounds very prestigious, to me it's like what my mom did, literally. But anyway, at the very end, I sort of realized that adults could do other things with their lives. And so I did a 5th year at Stanford and got a master's degree. But
is that your definition of something else with your life?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. With more education. It's like a strong default. But actually took a bunch of design classes, and some of it was product design, and some of it was like human computer interface. And that was so different from doing econ problem sets. So that was really the something different. And then that sort of launched me into like kind of this different world than I thought I would be in. And so that part, I think it was actually like that 5th year that was probably, in retrospect, the most kind of pivotal, because it opened up this whole other set of doors.
And where did it take you?
It initially took me to Berlin because I'd never been and spoke no German. But they had this kind of post-school, Deutsche Telekom, like German T-Mobile, had this like post-school internship program where they would take design students for 6 or 9 months. And I somehow snuck my way in and lived in Berlin and, got paid €500 a month, but it was great. And that was when like you could do that in Berlin a bit. You can't really do that of the Berlin of today. But I think it was like the work was, design and user interface design and like concept design. And then the people we were interacting with were all designers. And there was like kind of this emerging tech startup scene, actually not in Berlin, but mostly in London then. And it was just, again, this whole other world that was like very neat.
And from there?
I got really lucky, and I was reading the blog of a venture capitalist in New York called Fred Wilson, ABC, and a blog post basically went up saying, hey, we've had this great analyst on our team for a couple of years, but he's moving on, and so we need a new analyst. So if you're interested in his job, send us links to your web presence. And I read that and was like, what is this? I kind of knew the firm, but you're like, what job application is this? What's a web presence? Who would apply for this? And both like, I want to apply, but like, what's a web presence kind of? But I'd actually I had a Twitter account. I'd started this like design blog in Berlin because I was trying to be like the other designers. And so basically at the 11th hour, right before the form closed, I sent them 4 links. And ended up getting hired off the internet.
Wow. What are the 4 links? Your Twitter?
It was Twitter, my design blog, which was quite bad, but, maybe LinkedIn. And that might have been it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite impressive.
Like
I mean,
2010.
and an application,
so like 2010
I'm assuming.
internet. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, funny. It was like they actually didn't have another application. And in retrospect, there were people like professors at Stanford who knew the folks at Union Square Ventures. I don't know. I was too dumb to like try to be like, oh, have somebody email. Didn't do any of that. Just sent links off into the void, which actually gives me a ton of respect for the folks at USV and how they hire. Because literally it was 3 links. It wasn't, and then the Stanford person emailed someone who emailed someone. Didn't do any of that.
Okay, so Fred Wilson hires you.
Yep.
And Union Square Ventures go on to become one of the most successful VCs around.
Yes.
So who are some of the people that they backed?
So let's see. At the time, they had backed, Twitter, Tumblr, Etsy. It's a company called Tengen, which no one knew at the time, is now Mongo, but same company. Foursquare, Coinbase was like basically the first institutional investors, who were one of the first in Coinbase. The thing at the time, and this was early 2010s, was large networks of engaged users, which, I think maybe sounds kind of obvious, or like, of course you want to invest in like the big successful thing. But at the time, again, 15 years ago, it was like lots of people used Twitter, but would the thing ever make any money? Was deeply unclear.
And the answer is yes, if Elon buys it.
Yeah, and merges it with an AI company. Maybe it's still deeply unclear in a different way. But for the most part, like, those business models very much got proved out. But I think, again, early 2010, 2009, 2010 is when Fred on his blog coined the term freemium, which just feels part of the, at least, tech vernacular.
Yeah, I didn't know that's where it came from, actually. Yeah.
Right, but they're just things like that. Now we kind of call it PLG, but like that's what it was. And this was like this time where it felt like things on that part of the internet were so new, and all these concepts were being created, and there was something there, but we didn't quite know what it was. It didn't have words for it. And anyway, I think freemium's like a neat like case study of that, where now we all kind of know what it is. And you're like, oh, of course, that's a business model. Like, is it yours? Do you choose it? Move on. But at the time, it felt like more you were excavating something new.
So did you get to work with people like Jack Dorsey?
A little bit. I think there were founders that, were very established and so weren't kind of coming through the office on a regular basis. But a big part of the job, or when I joined, it was kind of 3 investment partners and me. And so I probably met, 2 or 3 founders a day for 2 years straight. And so just got to meet lots and lots of founders of all different sorts and stripes.
What's a good example? So if I'm a mercurial founder, building one of these companies, and I step into Union Square Ventures office, I'm probably quite excited, I'm probably quite nervous. I turn up, I've got a meeting with you. What are some of the questions that you'd ask me?
Oh my goodness. I think, so for me, it was funny because I was, the young kid basically at the firm and no one really wanted to meet with me, nor, they wanted to meet with Fred. They wanted Brad, Albert, right, the partners. Which is, I think, something I struggled with in the beginning because it was like, oh yeah, I understand why you don't want to meet with me. I'm sorry. Not what anyone actually wants to hear. I think what I realized, the job of a kind of young person, investment analyst at a firm, is not to apologize and not to gatekeep, but to figure out what that person is working on, how it compares to how the partners think, and then direct them or route them to the right partner. We talked about Fred in his blog. Lots of people, especially in New York at the time, knew of Fred and everyone wanted to meet with Fred. But if it was someone working on a developer tools business, they were better served with Albert. If it was someone working with a new protocol, Brad was the better person, right? And so there was this router. And so I think a lot of the questions, when I actually learned how to do the job, I was sort of this router and translation layer between the entrepreneur and the partners. And then after that meeting, I'd go to the partner and say, hey, I just met Paolo, and Paolo is working on this thing and he's going to explain it this way and you'll think it's that, but it's actually this, and go down this, and kind of try to matchmake a little bit there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's what I think the job actually was.
Like a translator.
Yeah. And it took me 6 or so months to figure that out. But then once I figured that out, it got a lot better.
Okay, so you actually view your space there in between as someone who you understand what the entrepreneur's working on and you understand what the partners are looking for from a thesis point of view.
Yeah.
But sometimes the founder's not amazing at communicating the needs
in
strictly to the desires.
The way that, again, the partners are wonderful, but these 3 guys kind of think about the world and it's around the idiosyncratic way. And so it's just, it's translating between those two.
As a founder pitching VCs, you're quite often told, to your point, try to get away from the analysts and speak directly to the deal makers.
I think it's good advice.
It's good advice.
Yeah.
But how does that impact you and feeling, did you feel insecure about yourself and your place around that?
Yeah, totally.
So how does that impact your career? Or what did you do about it?
Yeah, I think what I did was try to kind of be oh, that all makes sense. I wouldn't want to meet with me either. This, poor person unfortunately got stuck with me. What is the best thing I can do for them? And that's where I kind of figured out that translation piece. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So in general, your advice for founders is basically do the same. As in, you've been in that role, so you've been the person who's been overlooked as a result of it.
Yeah.
Is it a good career path for people?
I think those who who really like investing, and I do think, and I saw that at USC, investing done well can be this really intellectual, really interesting job. I think there are parts of it that are really similar to academia. I think that, outcomes and upside are very different between academia and kind of an investment role, but I think done well, you develop a thesis, you go and research it, you have this wonderful excuse to basically call up anyone you want, and they'll be like, I'd love to come to your office so you can ask me a million questions, right? It's this kind of racket.
Sort of like podcasting.
There's journalism, podcasting, investing. There's a couple of these roles that are really neat, structured rackets, but in a wonderful way. But I think it is fundamental, and the people who are best at it, and again, I think USV was excellent at this. I got to go to board meetings and see not everyone I thought was excellent at this. Is they're investors, not operators. They're not running the businesses, and they don't see themselves as someone who's running the business. And that's really, that is, I think, actually a very important distinction. So anyway, back to your question. I think it is a great opportunity for someone who's curious and wants to invest. I think for someone who wants to operate, you should actually just go operate. You want to build something, you should just go build the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got to meet the founders of Tumblr, Etsy, Kickstarter, obviously.
Kickstarter's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. Jack Dorsey, Brian Armstrong of Coinbase. What are some of these traits that these founders had that you could see a straight line through?
Yeah, I think one of the really helpful things for me was like, again, even the companies you mentioned, all those founders are really different. And I think that was actually really helpful, again, sitting there and being like, okay, the media narrative, especially at the time, was like, there's one type of person. And they probably have been, coding since they should touch a keyboard.
Yeah, like
and
a Zuck.
Exactly. And when they launch something, everyone on their college campus immediately uses it because they're a genius.
Running a business across borders used to feel like chaos until I found Wise Business. Wise is the app for doing things in other currencies, including managing finances of your international business. With one account, my team can pay suppliers in over 40 currencies. Clients can pay us from around the globe, and since my team has their own logins and limits, I can just check in when I feel like it with total peace of mind. With Wise Business, there are no hidden fees, there's no exchange rate markups, and there's no subscription costs that eat into my profits. Setting up the account was a breeze, and payments go out in as little as a few seconds. Wise even syncs with my accounting software, so I'm not bogged down in the weeds. Plus, with 24/7 live support and security like two-factor authentication, I can trust that my money is safe. To learn more about how Wise could work for your business, visit wise.com/business. It's international business made simple.
And that was kind of the narrative. And then you meet just whole swaths of people who are successful and be like, oh, some did that, some did something else, went to art school and like lived in a Berlin garage for a while, and Kickstarter kind of came out of that. It's not quite the Kickstarter story, but like adjacent. I think the people who were most successful truly liked what they were doing, and they liked it because they liked the work, not the like prestige that came with like other people liking their work, if that makes sense. And I think those two things are easy to conflate. You see people conflate. I've conflated them at various points in my life. But I think the people who, again, kept doing it just liked the work. And I do actually think there's so much work, you kind of have to like it. There's just too much to not.
Yeah, okay. And obviously, I suppose mission-led in the category as well.
Yeah, and there's this, I think sometimes this takes like a moral tone of like, mission-driven founders are good and, mercenary, or like, even though we call it mercenary, like money-led founders are bad. And I think that's too harsh. But again, I think it does come to like, there's so much work before an outcome, or to get to an outcome, you kind of gotta like the work.
Do you feel like being around those types of people drove you to want to become a founder?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. And again, that was kind of this tension where I got to talk to people all day. I got to have these pitches. It was so cool. And then they'd leave and I'd be like, now I get to write an email about everything I learned. And it felt so unfulfilling. And I remember saying this to a founder friend who's backed by USV, and he was basically like, Christina, after I have a meeting, I also go write emails. Like, you realize that, right? And I remember just being like, no, but like your emails are different. Like they're more impactful. They matter more. And he was sort of like, you're crazy, like agree. It's kind of fine, agree to disagree. But there was just something there where it felt like sort of unfulfilling to sit on the sidelines and analyze all of the time.
Fair. So then you launched Vanta and had a runaway success.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Totally. Truly an overnight success.
Excellent.
No years in the making.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So what did happen in between?
There was like 6 years. So to that, I think, of founders who came into the USV, some could code, some could not, some could kind of build software themselves, some could motivate people to build software. I think I knew myself well enough to know that I wanted to be able to build the software. Not that I would ever be the best in the world at it per se, but there was just something to like deeply understanding how it worked to build my confidence. And so I saved my bonus for 2 years and then just lived off that for the next 2. Didn't get a job, taught myself to code, built a bunch of stuff that no one's ever heard of. And, I think at the time, again, people were like, are you starting a startup? And they'd ask. And the answer was like, I don't know, kind of, which is like a really uncompelling answer. If you say that, people think, well, you're definitely not, like that doesn't sound like founder's answer. But I think for me, at least initially, one, it was just about developing the skills and the taste. And second, I had seen enough people working on something that they probably cared about at some point, but then sort of the shine truly wore off and they didn't really care about it. But because they'd raised money or had people working for them, they felt like they had to keep going.
Yeah.
And how much of a slog that is.
Yeah, entrepreneurship can be a cage of your own making.
Yeah. And how, we like say, oh, the worst thing that could happen is, everything goes wrong and it goes to zero and it's a crater in the ground. And actually that's a pretty, like, sure, it's not what you want to happen, but then it's over. Mm-hmm. And actually the median outcome is it just keeps slogging along and you burn years on it.
Yeah.
And so I had probably an unhealthy amount of skepticism on really wanting to work on an idea that I felt like would last for a long time.
Where did Dropbox come into the picture? Because I read in my notes that you were at Dropbox, and obviously you must have had a ridiculous breeding ground of
it's incredible talent.
Yeah.
So I kind of taught myself skills, built a bunch of stuff for 2 years. Nothing really felt right. Like, keep pushing.
You didn't make anything as good as Dropbox.
Definitely did not. Deeply did not. And I think I got to a point where I was like, okay, I can program, I can make stuff. But I've never really worked in a company, right? I worked at this quirky investment firm that was wonderful, but only sort of had coworkers. I did this stuff on my own and with a handful of friends, but what is a company? And I had some friends who were at Dropbox, and it was kind of the height of Dropbox's power and prowess, and so got really lucky and joined Dropbox to work on what at the time was a new product there. And so spent a couple years.
What product?
Dropbox Paper.
Oh, I used to use Dropbox Paper all the time.
Yes.
I loved it.
Yeah.
It's quite innovative.
There's a lot of actually kind of UI UX things that now are even...
it was delightful to use kind of thing. Yeah.
Pasting over a link that's now kind of more of an internet software standard. We, at least when I was there, or maybe say it for me, I never figured out how to explain what Dropbox Paper was to someone beside saying something that rounded to, it's more innovative Google Docs. You can use emojis in your documents. And actually that's awesome. And you should switch your whole business or team or personal setup from Google Docs to Dropbox Paper. When you say that, you sound a little like you've had too much Kool-Aid. But there's something real to it.
Yeah.
And we sort of I never figured out how to truly explain it. I remember 10 years ago, Stuart Butterfield, founder, CEO of Slack, had some tweet, or maybe it was in one of its long, medium meditation things, was the true test of a great product is how much it changes human behavior. And I always really liked that. Right? And I think under that metric, at least I was not able to get, in my tenure, was not able to get Dropbox Paper to that place.
You did say earlier, with reflection of the VC model and stuff, if you want to be a great operator, then also just go and do the thing.
Yep.
So you've done a lot of exploration, a lot of talking. What was your moment where you were like, you know what? Let's just go do the thing.
Yeah, I think it was actually when it became clear that the thing Dropbox Paper needed was to get closer to the rest of Dropbox. And I was not that product manager for lots of reasons. But that was clearly the most important thing. And I could try to do it. I would be mediocre at best. I'd be B- at best. And there were lots of other product managers who would be way better at that than me. And I think it was kind of a phase thing, right? And if, the initial task was try to get this thing off the ground and get early users and get feedback and wrap that in. And you're like, okay, that I really liked. And I felt like I was good at that. But the now take that again and connect it to the rest of Dropbox in a way that people who do like Dropbox and are logging in and see it and work with all the cross-functional teams to do that, that was just oh, again, I'm going to be a B-. I'm going to be kind of sad as I do it. So that's not me.
You mentioned earlier, the mission-driven founders and, other kind of founders and, there is no right or wrong way or whatever. But you have identified that people have to love the work. You have to do the work. You have to love the work because the work is generally a decade-long, at least, project. What is it about security compliance that could possibly make you wake up at night in a cold sweat, as I imagine you did, with a eureka moment that went, fucking hell. God, I just can't wait to solve that problem.
Yeah, I think two things, actually. And truly, we used to joke, in the founding story, you're we're never going to get away with the, ever since I was 4 years old, I've just been deeply passionate about, security compliance. Yeah. No one will believe that. We generally don't try that. Except for here as a meta point. No. So I think
fire engine, astronaut, security compliance.
Exactly. Isn't that what your kids do?
Naturally.
No, I think two pieces. So one, security compliance is actually so broad. And I like exploring. I can be a little bit of a shiny object person, especially if I'm not careful with myself. But like this is a constrained but large area, right? And so we get to think about everything from the cloud infrastructure account at a company to the people who work there, to the software they use, to the laptops they use and the application. Anyway, there's just like whole range of stuff. And so I think it's actually a like neat horizontal and broad field versus if we were, I don't know, just building a security vulnerability scanner, which many people do and most successfully, but that is like much deeper. Mm. So there's part of that I like. And then I think the other part is, and actually after paper, there's some of this too. Vanta as a product and a value proposition just is like deeply logical. The first time someone uses Vanta, it's because they probably have been asked by a customer for a certification or a framework. They don't have it, but if they get it, they will sign that customer and potentially many more. And so you're like, okay, so I will do that then. Or I can think about how much money might I get from these new customers? Should I spend the money on time to get the certification? Great. And I can make a, pretty logical spreadsheet decision. And then over time, you take something that's sort of like herding cats and like done in spreadsheets and takes a long time and you make it much more seamless and easy. And anyway, there's just like the way I could not explain why someone should use paper besides saying things like, but there's emojis and stickers. Mm. The reason you should use Vanta is like, because you pay X and then you make 10X as a business. Which is very different.
Completely get that. But how do you arrive at that insight?
About 6 months of conversations with folks.
So go on, you left Dropbox.
Yeah.
And what?
Left Dropbox, I think did the thing a lot of folks do who like to build, which is built a bunch of stuff that no one wanted. One of the best...
Like paper? No, I'm joking. I'll stop messing with you.
You said it, not me. Someday. But anyway, so built a bunch of stuff no one wanted. Then was like, oh, shoot, doing this wrong. No more coding. Because we can probably, hubris, but like probably build whatever we want to build. But like that's the quote unquote easy part. The hard part is like, what does someone want? And so spent 6 months going deep, as deep as we could with like founders, engineers, heads of security, anyone who kind of touched security. And it started just really open-ended and, what do you do? And you're like, what would you say your job is? Like, what's the best part of your week? The worst part of your week? And like trying to kind of find a person with a problem. And through that, got to security questionnaires and compliance and sort of saw
That's the best part of their week.
Yeah, as the worst part of their week, right? Like, it's basically like the sort of TLDR with security folks are like, the best part of their week is like securing stuff, right? Either doing it myself, working with engineers, like having that impact. The worst part of my week is like reporting on that, right? And so whether I'm reporting to like the team or customers or auditors, like I want to do the work, I don't want to talk about the work. But there's especially if you go up, most of your day is talking about the work. And that was actually kind of where it started.
It's interesting because there is an insight there really that's so applicable for all entrepreneurs, which is where you've built such a successful money machine is solving problems people can't be bothered to do.
Yes.
And that is like, there's a zillion problems in the world.
Yep.
And if you were to ask the questions as broadly as you did, I'm sure you used an amazing framework. But, just asking really good open questions. What's the best part of your week?
Right.
What's the worst part of your week? Those are such broad questions. You unpack so much. Yeah. And there's a real art to that. When I was starting my company, Heights, I did exactly the same thing. I read a book called The Mum Test.
Yep.
Very well known.
Right.
How to ask good questions.
Yep.
Basically, so you don't bias people.
Yes. Right.
Because you will just ask too many questions.
Right.
Where you getting the answer that you want.
Yes.
And it's actually surprisingly hard. It sounds really easy to say, what's the best part of your week? What's the worst part of your week?
Right.
But because you've now worked at Dropbox and Union Square Venture and other stuff, you are infected with bias. And you kind of know the smart answer. So it's actually really hard to ask such basic questions and get deep insights back. Yet you obviously unpack so much that you don't know. So you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
You can only get it by asking what sound like quite dumb questions.
Right. Yes. And I think you do have to get a little comfortable being like, this is going to sound really dumb, but that's okay.
Want to know what kills big deals faster than anything? Security compliance. Honestly, it's a headache, and I don't know anyone who likes doing it. But there is a solution, one that makes security compliance easy. Vanta. Think of Vanta as your compliance wizard. They automate everything for SOC 2 and ISO 27001, turning complex security requirements into a simple, streamlined process. Over 8,000 companies from startups to giants trust Vanta to handle their compliance. Use Vanta so you don't get slowed down by security paperwork and focus on what matters, growing your business. Visit vanta.com/secretleaders now and get $1,000 off in your first year.
Because I think one of the things about, entrepreneurship or starting something new is it doesn't really matter what you want the truth to be. The truth is the truth. And you have to figure out what that is. And if you don't, it doesn't work out. You slam into a wall at some point. Like, it just doesn't work. And so I think for me, that was the, like, I can sound dumb now and hopefully figure out something smart later, or I can sound smart now and be dumb later. I'm like, I'd much rather be smart in the long run than dumb, but actually. So
what do you think is a better way to build a great business? Focus on what someone says is the best part of their week and making it better? Or what is the worst part of the week?
Worst part.
Why?
Yeah. I think there is actually, within Vanta, we found this, there is deeply something to building something that does something valuable for someone that they don't want to do themselves.
Right.
Because they will not pay infinite amounts of money, but like that intersection of I have to do this, but I don't want to, is a like, can you make this go away?
Painkiller.
Yeah. Right. Versus the like, I really like this and like, can you make it slightly better? You know, and kind of argue team collaboration is a lot of that and why the value prop for those tools is so hard. Because it's like, your team will work better if you use Dropbox Paper. I can't quantify that and I can't tell you. You kind of have to believe that. But again, it's just a different pitch. And I think it's a tougher pitch.
So you've done this interview process. You found a bunch of people saying security compliance stuff is the worst part of my week.
Yep.
And you're thinking, well, you know, I hate myself, so I guess I'll just do all the work that everyone else hates forever.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, is that the logic?
I think the logic was more like, oh, these people really don't like this. And so much so that they actually don't. Many I spoke to didn't do it. Like, it'd be really valuable if I did this. But I don't know how. It'll cost me, I don't know, $200,000 and 12 months of my time. And like, I just got other stuff to do. But if there was an easy button, I'd press the easy button. Right. And so then it seemed like, okay, can I, you know, like, yeah, maybe that's not what you want to do. But
can I make the easy button?
Can I make the easy button? Right. And then we'd go and talk to people who are doing this work today manually. And they would all say, you can make an easy button. But then it's like, I'm a consultant. And I think about things as one-off and bespoke, and there's all this nuance. And so, of course, there's no easy button because what I do is like deeply different based on every company. And you kind of sit there and you're like, well, yeah, or like empirically that's true. And I believe you believe that, but like, does it have to be true? And I think there is something to like thinking about it with like a more of a software scaled mindset than a like one-off services mindset. We still find that tension today.
So how did you get started with this?
Got started. So there was this long year after we figured out, you know, like, well, all the consultants think we can't do it, but can we do it? And kind of spoiler, the answer ended up being yes, especially for a small company if you rely on best practices, because best practices are best practices for a reason. We didn't know that at the time. And so to really like figure that out and test understanding, we went to a friend's company and built them a SOC 2 process and a spreadsheet to go follow and interviewed all their engineers. And it was, again, this bespoke custom plan, basically.
Which is exactly what everyone had told you is
what
they
you had
already
to do. Yeah. And so it was like, okay, we'll just go do that. And both by doing that and then looking at the output, we'll learn a lot. We can test our understanding. We can also see if they even believe us and find any of this credible. Because they knew our backgrounds. They knew this was the first time. And that they actually quite liked it and learned a lot. And they're like, okay. Then we went to a second company and basically gave them the first company spreadsheet. We did not tell them we did that. We did some interviews. We did this thing. But then it was kind of a find and replace of the company name. And that was like, can they tell? You know, can they tell they just got a best practice spreadsheet and not their bespoke spreadsheet?
And you told them it was software, magic software or anything?
No, we told them we did it themselves. We said it was like very bespoke.
Right.
This is deeply custom to you. And it was not deeply custom to them. But it was kind of like, and you're like, how does it feel like it fit? Like, did we make something that feels, you know, deeply relevant to you? And they said, oh, yes. And you're like, oh, man, that's great. And so that was kind of the beginnings of it.
Okay. And at some point, I've read that you did do this sort of, it's definitely software.
Yes.
But yeah, so
I think that was
it's very common, right? Very common part of the journey.
I think it's and I think more people should do it.
Yeah.
Again, even if you can build software.
Everyone should just get Christina to do their spreadsheets, but say it's software.
No. But the reason you say it's software is because I think if you tell someone, hey, I just spent 40 hours custom making your spreadsheet, they'll be like, oh, it's really good. Like that sounds like a lot. And if you're like, I don't know, I wrote some code that spit this out. Is my code any good? It's kind of a level removed. And they can be like, oh, you're great, but your code is bad. And so it's this way to like get people to critique you without the truly asking them to do that, or kind of tricking them into doing that in a way that, again, I think is helpful for finding ground truth and also helpful for at least overcoming the American, like, but I'm trying to be nice to you.
So what were those scrappy early days like then?
Scrappy. I think the lived experience, it was both exciting and, I don't know, kind of YOLO, by which I mean it's like you don't have anything.
Because you're a solo founder, so who are you doing this with?
Other founders, basically, or their teams in San Francisco. And I think, that was one advantage of knew a handful of folks who were willing to engage with us. And they knew we didn't know security and compliance really, but it was something they needed. And they trusted us to basically work really hard and try to get to the right answer. And that's kind of why the door opened. And sometimes other founders ask me, like, how did you get your first customers? Why did anyone believe you? And it's sort of like they didn't. Or it's because we'd worked together previously, right? And it was like that sort of kind of belief, which I think was a really good hack. It wasn't like a super conscious strategy at the time, but again, in retrospect, I think that worked well.
One thing I found particularly remarkable about your story, and maybe you don't, I'm interested if you do, is that you didn't raise money until you hit 10 million of ARR.
Mostly, yeah.
That's quite unusual.
Yes.
So how did you manage to maintain a pipeline, costs, etc.? How lean was the team to get to that point? Can you just paint the picture for us?
For sure. So we raised kind of $3 million at the very beginning. So that's the mostly part. But on that $3 million, we got to basically 10 of ARR. Team was about 50 when we eventually raised. The magic is cash flow. And I read this blog post by Peter Reinhardt from Segment that is still online. If you Google his blog, I think it was called like Finance for Founders or something. And he talked about cash flow, which is like not really something I really knew it was, beyond a line on some accounting statements. But basically, we would charge our customers annually up front. And so every month, we'd like get all this money from new customers and then turn around and immediately pay everyone that month, roughly. And then the next month, it would happen again, and we'd pay people. And it just let us kind of build off of cash flow. That's like practically how we do it. And the closest thing I have to a cheat code in startups is charge your customers annually up front. I think it's also a good sign of product market fit. If you can like take all the money initially and someone will like agree to that, and they might be like, humph, but they agree. Which is
for anyone watching, whenever you're on a software product and you see, God, I get 2 months free. Yes. I'm a genius.
Right.
You're like, well, yes, sure.
Yes. There's a reason they're offering that.
Yes, you are being psychologically hacked, but go for it.
And then I think the other part of that, so I think actually having worked in an early stage VC firm, I understood how that worked. I understood how VCs can think and realized that, yes, everyone wants to fund a $1 million revenue business, but they want to fund a $2 million revenue business even, and a $5 million revenue business is even better. And so it's easier to raise money over time, not harder. Yep. And your terms get better and your negotiating leverage gets better. And so if you can wait.
I'd love to know a little bit about that, because negotiating leverage is, I think, one of the least talked about and most important things.
Yeah.
In my experience with all my entrepreneurial friends, etc., the more mature we've got, the more gravitas we've got, the more everything else.
Yep.
You realize that it isn't really about raising X on Y valuation.
Right.
It's about how much control do you have?
Yep.
And who led negotiating the terms?
Yep.
What does it look like when things go well? What does it look like when things go bad?
Yes.
To your point, if you're raising at a 1 million ARR, you've got 10x less leverage than 10 million ARR.
Right. Yes.
So how did your experience as a VC help you negotiate the best terms possible?
I think I understood even what you just said, and understood that, like, yes, headline valuation and, dilution and all of that, but board, like, who's on the board, what the board looks like. Because I think almost easier to remove a founder from a company than a board member often, which is kind of a crazy statement. But that means like who is on the board and how that works is like really important. And how much control the folks on the board have. And so I think some of it was understanding the high level, and some of it was understanding, oh no, there's these things, again, that aren't actually often talked about or are talked about as like, oh, but like, do you like the, potential investor over beers? And you're like, that is nice. And ideally you have that. But really you actually agree on a like more fundamental moral values level. And how do you suss that out? And you should suss that out, I guess. So really more things like that.
And in terms of negotiating, you went to Y Combinator, right?
Yep.
So this was the same year that both OpenSea and Substack were formed?
Yep, they're both same batch, Winter 18.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty illustrious company.
Yeah.
So you one of the lucky recipients. I mean, I've read before, Y Combinator, you do get a handful of unicorns like yourselves, but obviously most of them raise a bunch of money and then don't make it. So, what was that experience like for you?
I think YC is great. I think they're excellent at what they do. And most of what they do is they take whatever you're working on, like whatever idea you have, and they push it. Like it is an accelerator, but they take the thing and shove it, and they shove you. And if you have something that resonates, that's, kind of painful, but like deeply helpful.
At 10 million ARR, you have some product market fit though. So
we went into YC at 0. Actually.
Oh, right. Oh, see. Okay, really? Okay.
YC was 0 to basically 200K.
Okay, fine. So good shoving.
Yes, good shoving. Painful shoving, but like good shoving.
Yes, okay.
And if you have something that's not ready to be shoved and it gets shoved, like it kind of splats, right? Yeah. And so my advice actually to folks considering Y Combinator is try as much as you can, make sure you have something that's ready to be shoved, because you're going to get shoved regardless.
What is some advice that you received at YC that you think has stayed with you that's worth sharing?
Oh, yeah. Stuff we still do at Vanta. YC, people talk about group partners and office hours. And my experience with those is basically you come in the beginning. They say, hi, this is a 10-week program. Please set a goal for week 10. It should be a goal that's important. So if it's a B2B, it's probably a revenue goal. If it's consumer, it's probably like an active user goal. But like set something for 10 weeks from now. And then every week, come in and tell us what you'll do, what you did last week, what you'll do next week, and where you are. And it sounds so elementary. And yet, he said this, basically it was like, it was going from 0 to 200K. It seemed reasonable. I had a spreadsheet that was like, here's roughly what you have to do. It was hard. But you have to show up every week and be like, well, I said I would get to 45K this week. I actually only got to 37. But here's what I'm going to do to get to, 52 by the end of next week, right? And you have to stand up in front of your peers every week and basically say that. And it's exceedingly motivating. And again, it sounds so silly, but there's something that's like psychologically deeply impactful of doing that. And we're actually still, this is how we run forecasts at Vanta. This is how we run a lot of stuff still to this day, is sort of tell everyone where you'll be in a week or a month, and then come back and check in. And then at the end of the week or the month, you have to say, well, did you get to the place you thought you'd get to?
Yeah, I think it's such a very simple but perfect example of leadership training, because actually so much about leadership is just being accountable.
Yeah.
It's like saying the thing out loud of where you need to get to in order for things to work. And being accountable, having, the group of people around you hearing you say that thing is incredibly cringy.
Yep.
If you have to then go up the next week and say we didn't do it.
Right.
You have to reflect on that.
Yep.
And I think that process over 10 weeks, and hopefully longer in a career, drives you to figure out whether you do want to take on that responsibility or not.
Right.
Because some people actually crumble at that.
Yes.
And that's okay.
Yeah, right.
But it's a good forcing function in terms of the shoving.
Yeah.
That's a good forcing function to be like, there's so many different ways to complicate leadership.
Right.
Actually, accountability. Yeah. I said I'd do that thing.
Yeah.
Did I do that thing?
Did I do the thing? Yeah.
Or should I actually change the thing that I'm saying I should do because I've over-egged it?
And you've learned XYZ and short. Yeah.
I think that's so valuable.
Yes. Yeah.
So at Vanta, you basically operate it all like YC.
Yeah, we've done different versions. There was a period in the, 2 or 3 years in where we'd do everyone had weekly goals and you had to get on a Zoom call and do it. No one liked that phase. I think there was something there. I don't think I set it up as well as it should have been. And now it's kind of a more structured version of that. But we still do this. Yeah.
And at Vanta, I know you're a unicorn, but I've also heard a rumor that you're a $2.5 billion unicorn.
Yep.
Yeah?
Yep.
Not
Internet reports that. Yep.
A fact?
It's reported on the internet. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Internet.
Yep.
I wasn't sure if it was public knowledge yet.
Yeah.
Okay. So as a founder of a company worth over $2.5 billion, how does that hit you? Like, genuinely, is it like, it's like part of a journey or whatever, or are you able personally and with the team to reflect on those moments and think, fuck yeah, that's great?
Somewhere in between. I think, no, I have like the classic founder disease of you're like, yeah, sure, but like what's next?
What's next?
Yeah, which is both helpful and, as folks I've worked with over the years have taught me, like not always the most motivating thing to work for. So there's more adjusting, like celebration is even pre-Vanta not in my DNA. And there is now more of it, but that is, again, kind of a learned thing that great folks I've worked with have made clear in a way that's helpful. I think the headline number, look, there's like two ways I think about it. One is like, oh, that's great. And again, when you start one of these things, you both want to do that, and that's the plan. And the chance of that happening is very small. But like, oh, sure, yes, this was always the plan. It was, everything's going at pace. And then the other side is, when I talk to my family in Ohio about it, they're both very proud. But like, you kind of say these numbers and they're just like, they sort of laugh. And not in a mean or malicious way at all. It's just like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, what are you California people? Like, why do you have so many zeros on your numbers? That doesn't make any sense. And on some, like, they're right on some level too. There's this kind of layer of, California-ness over all of it. And the California-ness is wonderful, but I think being able to see it as someone from like outside of the bubble in the world is also kind of helpful.
How much of your identity do you feel like is wrapped up by Vanta?
I mean, probably more than I'd like is the honest answer. Like, certainly at peace. But I think even doing the thought exercise, if it disappeared tomorrow, again, I'd be like quite sad and quite like, oh shoot, what do I go do now? But then it'd be like, shoot, I figure it out. And again, that might be kind of a sad and painful thing, but it's something one can do. That's sort of how I think about it.
When you're in your role at Vanta, so CEO with your leadership team, how would they describe you?
I think at my best, I've kind of tried to borrow the demanding and supportive framework. And so I think there's, probably some of both. And the demanding bit is like, it cares a lot about the company, like can be intense about it. But again, at my best, a bit of a a lot of a like caring, supportive overlay on that. But trying to, again, keep those two things both true.
Okay. And so what about feedback culture?
I think it's gotten better at Vanta over time. I think, we, jokes aside, Vanta's culture can be very Midwestern U.S. And there's great parts about that. There's like, do good work hard, head down, like not too much noise, like just the facts. And then it also can be a little conflict averse. I've worked a lot on the conflict aversion over the past few years. Like,
do you feel like you're conflict averse?
Definitely was a couple of years ago. Yeah. I think I've tried to reframe it for myself as like, yes, you can avoid the thing now, but it will in fact just get worse. And one of my kind of life principles is everyone is more obvious than they think they are, very much me included, right? And so you're like, you can say the thing now, or you can just not say it, but it will become obvious over time. And that is so much more frustrating to everyone else. You should probably just figure out how to say what you're thinking in a supportive, constructive way.
At the start of our interview, we were talking about that pie, right? And that you think that version is, these are things I'm good at. So anyone can be a founder because these are things I'm good at and these are my gaps. And the way that I think about things are these are my gaps.
Yep.
So what are some of the gaps that you've just had to force yourself to learn at the unicorn stage that weren't so important at the early building stage?
Yeah. I mean, I think for a lot of founders, the kind of management piece, certainly probably some pieces of leadership too. But I think it's how do you... sort of easy, I think, for a founder generally to be demanding and to see what's wrong. And there's very few folks who find 100%, like that 100% of the time motivating, right? And so figuring out that balance and again, figuring out like if there is something you think is wrong or how to say it in a constructive, supportive way. And again, still say it. And I think I went through I just said it, that went badly. And so it was like, okay, then I stopped saying things and that kind of went badly in a different way and like find that middle ground of, again, saying what you, or like getting the point across you want in a way that the other person can understand where you're coming from and what you're saying and like work with. So there's probably something in that journey.
How much do you think that your experience of failing, or the micro failures, but like the companies that you were working on beforehand,
Yeah.
how much of that experience do you think helps fuel you at different stages of making Vanta a success?
Oh, I think quite a lot, but not in the I think at times I've had a chip on my shoulder, but actually that's not something I think about now because it's like, oh, this is kind of working again.
Yeah.
You're not quite playing with
Oh,
the
it
house
turns
like
out
money,
that
but you're
charging everyone annually up front was
actually
a really
worked.
simple solution.
Who would have thought? But I do think there's actually something to the unlike Facebook, unlike Dropbox, I have never had the experience of I went and built something by myself and then launched it and the world loved it. It would take me, 2, 3, 4, 10 iterations. But if you keep iterating, especially in B2B, I think you get there. And I think that frame of, and it's something I try to very much enforce in Vanta culture is launch something, try something. It probably won't work. That's fine. Your job is to get it right by the 5th time, not the 1st time.
Iteration.
Yeah. And again, you're not judged on the 1st. It's the 5th. But get to the 5th quickly. Go for it.
Obviously, now that we're talking, you start your journey of talking about, these spreadsheets we would make, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, now the assistance you'd have from AI at doing so many of these things it's just fascinating.
Yeah.
That journey could have been shrunk so much. So there's so many startups that are starting right now using a lot of the philosophy that you're talking about, talk to customers, ask the broad questions, but then solve through AI. So how much do you think AI has currently simplified your business, or is it creating more of a competitive tension?
No, we're quite excited. Or my kind of maybe it's related to Vanta, but Vanta's side, my take on this is AI and the new technologies let us build these magical product experiences that we've thought about in the past, but haven't been able to build. A Vanta-specific example are these security questionnaires. Basically, when you're selling software, at some point you probably get a long spreadsheet of questions that, say, where's your data stored? How's it stored? How's
and already the worst part of your week is still even having to answer those.
Exactly, right? And so, the idea of oh, well, can't you just have it, have some technology, like a script, look at the old answers and write in the new ones? We thought about that. We tried to build that in 2017. Total, not a novel idea, but the tech wasn't good enough. Now it is. And so that's just I think this tech unlocks these things that we've thought about, but now can finally do. And they are magical. And it'll be great. So that's my broad frame on AI.
Okay, that makes lots of sense. Now, I've heard you say before in another interview that the best founders are learning machines. Speaking of LLMs. So what are some of the best things that you've learned?
About LLMs?
No. That, to be fair, was a little trick there, a little segue. No. What are some of the best lessons you've learned on your founder journey?
Oh my goodness. I think so much of, especially an earlier stage found, 0 to 20, 30 million, founder is you have to stand up so many different parts of the company. And your job is, in fact, to get them to a place where you can hire someone who is excellent at that function or part of the company. And you may or may not, you probably don't have experience in the thing. And so your job is, in fact, to go in and do something new that you are almost definitionally bad at. And you will feel like you're bad at it. You'll feel like it's important to the company, but you are failing at it. And your job is to learn it fast enough to both figure out what good looks like and then attract one of those people. And then when you do that, you have to move to the next thing that you have never done and are bad at and get better at it such that you can do this again. And that kind of sounds good and logical and whatever, but the lived emotional experience of those years, at least for me, was I am bad at everything that the company needs me to be good at. And just when I start feeling like I might get good at it, I have to go be bad at something new. And I think that once I kind of figured out, oh, that's what I'm supposed to feel like I'm failing. And I shouldn't actually fail. But again, it will feel like that in the moment. And so don't feel that bad about it. Again, get better, but don't dwell in it was something of an unlock, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I'm learning from listening to you as well is, framing things with the right questions. So I'm sitting here listening to you thinking, okay, so selfishly with all the things I've got to learn next, and I'm actually currently going through the 20 to 30 million experience as well. So you just totally nailed the challenges. Actually, when you take on a new role in the company and you don't know what you're doing, having a beginner mindset, which is that kind of, we spoke about earlier, broad questions, sounds stupid to someone else, but actually super helpful to be so curiously childlike and not understanding how something works has always, to me, been the best way of figuring out how to then do the thing.
Yes. Yeah. And
so long as it's not finance, because I will never become amazing at that.
Right. Some of the things you want guardrails on. I mean, actually, I tried to, I don't know, get good. I was like too stubborn to outsource a lot of the early accounting and just messed it up 7 different ways. It was that was a terrible decision.
That's all right, because AI would definitely help with that nowadays.
Would have been better than whatever I did. That was just a mess. That took years. Yeah.
So one of your roles now as CEO, I suppose, like new one stepping into, is spokesperson. Mm-hmm. Which seems quite obvious, obviously, for some, but not if it's uncomfortable to you.
Yeah. And I think, again, I didn't, I get better with practice like everything else. But I think there's something to whether or not someone else can and can't do it. There are definitely better spokespeople at Vanta than me in a lot of ways, but they kind of don't have like the moral, like, can be like, oh, well, here's Christina's founding story, but like that's generally less compelling. And so there's
I can't be like, was she lonely? And they're like, I don't know.
Exactly. You're like, no, yeah. So I think there's a part where you're like, you have to do it.
Yeah.
Whether or not you want to, like the want is like not part of the equation.
So if someone's listening and they want to build a company in a place where they're not necessarily qualified for, which, in most cases is most people.
Right.
What should they do? What are the questions they should ask? How should they start?
Oh, I do think people can learn whatever they want to. It takes time and it takes effort. And, if we had wanted to start a medical tech company, we could have. I think it would have been several more years. It would have not have been this, 6 to 12 months of research. It would have been, 6 times longer than that. But you can do it. And so, and to that, I think, okay, well, it's going to take me 6 years. Do I like this enough to go through 6 years of it to even like get to something that seems reasonable? But it sort of goes back to like, I think you've got to like the work because there's so much of it.
When we're talking about liking the work, how, what is the work that you're referring to? Like in your case, like what is the actual work that you say that you still like?
What would I say I do?
Well, is it evangelizing Vanta? Is liking the work security compliance? Is it product frameworks? Is it managing people?
It's a lot of people.
What's the thing that you actually like?
Yeah.
What keeps you motivated to keep doing it?
I think actually at a macro level, the motivation has changed. It used to be very much, and I still really like this, but it's like talking to a person with a problem and being like, oh, I think I can solve that, and then trying, and then like 5 iterations later, but like doing that, right? And like that loop. I still really like that. I do much less of like that whole loop, especially myself, although a little bit. I think now though it's more like building the machine that does that loop, right? And building a machine or like building a company that, I hope very much like the folks who work at Vanta really like working at Vanta. Or, and the folks don't, like helping them find something they do really like. But like the system architecture piece of it, I think, is now much more the job. And so trying to, in some ways, take that like product building mindset and apply it to like a company.
And you mentioned earlier, obviously, as the analyst, that sort of insecurity, people are overlooking you, et cetera, et cetera. Did you have much imposter syndrome going into this new space?
Like probably, but I think I just kind of deeply believed, or then it was like, well, my way of coping with that or dealing with that is like, I should just go learn things. And again, this is kind of even back to the like, why did I have to teach myself to code? It was so I knew. I don't know, that's where the confidence came from. And I think that is like that is a through line, is like my confidence comes from understanding the details.
Would you describe yourself as a confident person?
Sometimes, if I know the thing. Yeah. But I think it's now something I deeply know about myself. So if I like, want to get confident in, marketing, right? Again, what is a PMM, right? Like, it's like, okay, let me go like truly figure that out for myself. And then once I feel like I understand it, that's where the confidence comes. And I just like know I need to do that.
So how do you think that framework then, when you're hiring other people with different personalities and stuff, because that's such an entrepreneurial thing that you just said, right? I'm the same. I'm like, well, I know that I can do anything so long as I do it.
Yeah.
But I find it quite hard to learn it in a textbook. But if I do the thing, then I'm all good.
Yeah.
But, I consistently get outperformed by people in other roles who don't need to do that necessarily as their way of becoming an expert at the thing. So do you feel like if there's like sort of a limitation when you're hiring that creates blind spots in like hiring people like you?
Oh, interesting. I think on the even in school, I always had to study. I had to study in high school, wasn't even just college. But I kind of knew that about myself, whereas I think I went to university with a bunch of people who didn't have to study and would do quite well. But I just kind of was I'd figured out in high school I wasn't that person. And so sort of made peace with it. And I think there's something here too. It's oh yeah, I'd like to be that person, but I don't know what that's like. That doesn't work for me, so I will not do that.
Okay, yeah. So know yourself.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who's currently doing a 9-to-5 role, but is inspired, does want to become a founder, not quite sure where to start?
I think you have to start. I think you have to start. And that does not, maybe that means quitting your 9-to-5, or maybe that means carving out time outside of those hours on the weekends, whatever, to start exploring. But I think you have to start, and that is the hardest part, because then usually the subsequent question is but start on what? That's a good question. You figure that out. I think to try to be slightly more helpful than that. What idea do you want to start with? And I think if you have one, great, and if you don't, it's the way I thought about it was what's a domain you'd actually be quite happy to work in, even if things didn't work out. And so security was that for me, was I want to learn a lot about this. I want a startup to come out of this. If it doesn't, I'll be sad. But I'll actually, of all the things I could have learned, I will be happy I learned these things. And security has that in a way other domains don't for me. And so figuring out, what's your version of that is.
Okay. We've been very generous and got you a big billboard. In fact, Times Square, the whole of Times Square has been taken over for you with a giant billboard space where you can advertise your message to entrepreneurs globally. What would it say?
So not Vanta, but just...
Well, you. Yeah.
Oh,
your worst nightmare.
Yeah, that sounds terrible. You're
we stuck your face everywhere.
Can we give the billboard to someone else, please? Step one.
That's a very inspiring message.
Yeah, exactly. Please take this over now. What's the message? I mean, I do think there is something to just start. I know I just said that, but I get emails from folks who say, "Hey, I don't want to listen to this podcast, and I really want to learn to code, and I really want to quit my job, but what should I do?" And you're usually you should quit your job if you want to do that. And I know it's scary, but again, if you're writing that email, you might be in a position where the worst case outcome is you end up interviewing for another job, and that's not what you want. But how lucky are we truly? And then there's a vein of email, which is I've already left and I'm doing this. And then it's just keep going. Keep going until you feel like you're not learning anymore. So.
That's nice.
I don't know if that's quite billboard worthy.
Where's that one?
We should ask a PMM, honestly.
Yeah, keep learning till you feel like you're not learning anymore is lovely.
Yeah. I do think that is true. Yeah.
Amazing. Christina, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.